background in liberal arts, history, teaching, and English. He also speaks fluent French, holds a degree in Russian, and is co-author of the Philadelphia Experiment. Stanton T. Friedman holds bachelor's and master's degrees in physics and spent 14 years working on classified government programs in high-power electric propulsion. Since 1970, they've been lecturing in schools and colleges across the United States and Canada on the presence of alien craft around planet Earth. I'd arranged to meet them in the small Arizona town of Prescott, where they'd been invited to deliver their lecture at the Yavapai College.
We have been told that the Air Force was the chief agency involved in the investigation of UFOs. We have been told about Project Grudge, Project Sign, Project Blue Book. And we have been told that these are essentially the only efforts by the Air Force to investigate the phenomenon of UFOs. And that Project Blue Book was closed in 1969, and that its records in 1975 were transferred to the National Archives. And so if you write a letter of inquiry to the government, any agency of the government, you invariably will get the same answer. The government's files on UFOs were transferred to the National Archives. Project Blue Book material is totally available, and it can be viewed or obtained from the National Archives. There's only one thing wrong with that statement, and that is that it is not true. And it becomes increasingly clear that they have known a great deal, and that they have been keeping it from the American public for reasons known to the government.
I'd arranged for Stan and Bill to meet me in my motel room the next day. Primarily, I wanted to question them further on the cover-up of UFO investigation, and to see if they had any more information on government projects such as the Philadelphia Experiment or electric flying craft. I wasn't really prepared for what they told me.
I am convinced, after 24 years now of studying investigation, that the evidence is overwhelming that planet Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled extraterrestrial vehicles. Some UFOs are somebody else's spacecraft. I'm also convinced that some small group in the government of the United States, and probably in other countries as well, knows very well that we're dealing with alien spacecraft. We're dealing with what in the States is appropriately called a cosmic Watergate. We're not convinced that everything should be put on the table. Technical data, for example, I'm not at all sure should be out on the table, because the key feature about flying saucers, forgetting philosophy, religion, and all those other areas which are certainly important, has to be, how do they work? Every government in the world would like to get its mitts on that kind of technology. Unfortunately, what that would mean, better weapons delivery and defense systems, I suppose. And so I don't think that data should be put on the table unless everybody puts all their data out on the table.
And we both feel that it's very, very important for the future of the race to recognize at some point in our sociological development that we are planetary creatures. That is, members of a planetary society, as opposed to nationalistic creatures, members of individual, in this case 158 now, different tribes, essentially countries, on the same planet. I think that once that realization is made, that we begin to think of ourselves as members of the human race on planet Earth.
The thing about governments, though, most governments, is that priority number one is to stay in power, whether they're elected governments or despotic governments.
Yes.
Staying in power is the key. And I think in the United States, for example, any president that stands up and says, look, we've been lying to you for 35 years. We have had positive proof of their existence. We can't reveal the technical data, but we've known it. We've had our reasons. Is going to immediately be accused of being a liar, quite straightforwardly, is in danger of losing the next election, is risking his political skin, so to speak. In the United States, that could be done by a president who had been elected twice in a row, because you can't run for a third term now. We haven't had such a president since General Eisenhower.
Frequently, the question most asked, why, if they are coming here, haven't they chosen to contact us? Why don't they land on the White House lawn and make themselves known?
And say, take me to your leader, of course. That's the common joke in the States.
That's right.
Anyway.
The only problem is there is no leader to be taken to. Nobody speaks for the planet.
There's nobody who speaks for planet Earth.
That's true.
Certainly not the President of the United States does not speak for 4.5 billion
That's right. He's got enough trouble talking for his own staff lately. But yeah, I think maybe the prerequisite for their communication with us is that we talk to them first. We ask them to talk to us as a planet. Now, there's been almost no thinking along that line.
I was at a television station of all places and had to wait between interviews. I was doing like 3 different things there, and there was time in between. I was introduced to the station manager. We talked, and he said, gee, you ought to talk to Major Jesse Marcel. He handled one of these saucers that crashed. Well, that was kind of a good lead. He gave me the town that Jesse lived in, and I contacted Jesse, and he told me a very interesting story. Sounded very straight. He couldn't remember the exact date, said it was in all the papers. I got that story and passed it on to Bill, and he found the newspaper articles, and we checked a whole bunch of papers. Jesse was right on, and everything he had said. So he gave us an independent check on him. That was one part of the story, and that dealt with pieces of material that were found that apparently had exploded from a vehicle going by in the sky, 70 miles outside Roswell, I guess, out in the boonies.
Outside of Roswell.
Yeah, well, New Mexico is a very big place. It's the 3rd or 4th largest state, maybe the 5th, and it doesn't have a high population. It's got a lot of mountains and desert. At that time, it had fewer than 1 million people in an area of 125,000 square miles, something like that. And they were mostly in the cities, and it was an area where there was an enormous amount of classified government research going on. That's the place where the atom bomb was first tested. It's where it was developed. It's where all the early rockets after the Second World War were fired, captured German rockets at White Sands Proving Ground. It was where the secret city Los Alamos was. There were a number of other Air Force bases. You could hide an army there. And you had a whole host of people who were very patriotic after the war when they found out that the atom bomb was developed there, and then they knew that there was a reason for the security that they'd run into. He was the intelligence officer of the only atomic bombing group in the world, the 509th Bomb Group. They found all this stuff covering the ground, 3/4 of a mile long, maybe a 1/4 mile wide, kind of V-shaped. And they filled up a truck with it and half a car with it, brought that back, leaving plenty there, which was later vacuumed up by military people, as the local people said. But that was only part of the story. The other part is even more fascinating because it involved apparently the crash of the rest of the vehicle, 100 miles or so west of there, and bodies were found on board that, and the military carted that off.
Any description of the bodies?
Oh, yes. Very quickly, between 3.5 and 4.5 feet high, 85 to 95 pounds, essentially hairless, a head larger in proportion to the body than a human head would be, but not larger than a human head, widely spaced and deeply set eyes, no apparent protrusions for ears or nose, nares and ear canals present, but not the protrusions that a human would have. Very small teeth, and unusually 4 fingers instead of 5, and working in quite a different way. They seem to be articulated in the sense that they would work something like this, with this finger up here being sort of folding over these 2, being less useful, but these 3 being the graspers.
The hairs on the back of my neck were standing on end. What I was hearing couldn't possibly be true. But here, these 2 university-educated men, one a scientist, the other an author, believed every word they were saying.
We should stress here now that there are more than 3,000 reports in one computerized file of observations of alien beings associated with flying saucers. That covers dozens of countries, lots of incidents over at least a 35-year period. And there are no reports of creatures with 3 arms or 3 eyes or 3 legs or, the science fiction kind of stuff. And I think we have to take that into account, that one must be careful how one breaks the news, so to speak. In the United States, for example, the Mormon religion has long accepted the notion of beings on other worlds. Certainly the Buddhists do, and the Hindu religion does. There are some fundamentalist Christian sects in the United States, however, who are not inclined in that direction at all. I mean, this is it. And it would be very upset and disturbed. You can't just lay something as significant as flying saucers, which change our whole position in the universe, after all. It's like Copernicus. He took man out of the center of the universe, moved it 1 step over from the Earth to the sun. The book was banned for 300 years because it was disturbing to the high priesthood of the time. So the next generation is certainly going to know, have a different perspective. But you've got to be careful about that. You can't destroy what people have thought and grown up with without replacing with something that's solid and concrete. Max Planck, a German physicist, once said that new ideas come to be accepted, not because their opponents come to believe in them, but because their opponents die, and a new generation grows up that's accustomed to them. And so it may well be that you need to have this background. Space travel, man is not alone. These are commonly accepted notions now. They certainly weren't 30 years ago. If you go back to 1947, you talk space travel, you were considered pretty odd, pretty strange. That was science fiction. That was Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon. So there has been an enormous shift in attitude. And maybe the finishing touch for that is the announcement, some kind of announcement about flying saucers.